Now we made sure that our app runs everywhere. We want to add one more feature, and that is we want to be able to restart the application but not lose all the post data and all the scores that we collected so far. So what we'll do is we'll store all the information in a database, and we're going to store it in Sqlite. And in order to do that from Rust, we're using a crate called Sqlite. And the documentation is here. And in our case, what we're actually going to do when we install it, we are going to bundle it. And that is to make sure that we don't have to rely on Sqlite being installed on the device. We are just bundling it with our app, so we don't have to worry about it. It makes our binary a little larger, but that is fine. So let's go ahead and cargo add Sqlite. And we're going to have to go now to our cargo toml and change that install a little bit. So we're going to say that the version is this, and we want it to be bundled. Okay. And now we are ready to go ahead and use it. And we made sure that everything builds still. And now we can go ahead and add that module, like a new database module, to our library. So let's call it DB, and we're going to create that module. All right, let's go there. And first of all, we're going to have a name for our database. And you're just going to call it Reddit ticker Sqlite. And then we are going to have a struct, which basically just holds the connection, but it might hold more things in the meantime later on. So connection is what we add here. And obviously we need to add the import to get the Sqlite connection into our namespace. So here we go. Let's implement creation of the database. Okay, why do we have a path here? Well, the thing is that we can't just create the database wherever we want. And we're going to actually have Flutter provide us the directory where we can store the database file. So that's going to come up in a second. And so for now, what we're going to do, we're just going to open a new connection at that path. And then we're going to map there. And I'm going to copy that line in. Again, I don't want to lose too much time here with boilerplate stuff. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to map the error that we could get here. And we're going to use an anyhow crate to do that. Use anyhow. Anyhow. Kind of like we did before. So what we're going to do here is, like, if we get an error opening the database, we're going to report that error. We're going to tell us what happened, right? And then we provide the original error with that. So we can best handle that. And then the DB will be this with the connection. And then we're going to init the tables of the DB. So let's create that method for now. We're going to have to init the tables at least the very first time. And we're going to write that one out in a second. And it's going to return unit. So we're going to say db.init tables. And if that went fine, then we can return OK. All right, so now that create method is done. The result we need to also import from anyhow. Okay. So now let's go ahead and write this init tables method. And I'm not going to type out the query that we're going to do. We're basically going to execute a batch And again, if you want to learn more about how this library works for SQL, you should consult the documentation. I will not go into too much details about that here. We're just going to write a simple batch query, and I'm going to just explain what it does real quick. So, all right, and then we're going to map the error again and return. So, okay. So what does this? So it should be tables. All right. So what does it do? So we're going to have two tables. The first one is basically the one that holds the posts, the Reddit posts, and the primary key is a post ID, and that is unique. And then we hold the title of the post, the URL of the post, and then the seconds since Unix epoch, right? Since 1970, when the post was added, right? And then we have a separate table that holds all the scores. And the scores are only tied to the post via this post ID, right? And then we just have and added the same timestamp that we use for the post, and since Unix epoch. And then we have the score value itself here. And then obviously we want to find scores by ID quickly, so we create an index for that column. All right. And if that is all kind of new to you, you should probably read a little bit about SQL databases and SQL, how that works. But this is a very simple to tables here. And that is pretty much all we want to do for now, because we just want to make sure that in the next step that we can actually connect to the database and that we can create it and so on. So let's go to the store and add that database in there. So here we got the store, and we're going to skip this as well, because obviously we don't need direct database access on the Dart side, nor could we somehow serialize this to Dart. And so we're going to do that. And and we made an option. Oh, we're going to have to import it. We made it an option, right? Because when we create the store, we want to just give it none. And that is because we don't want to really do that yet here. This is a synchronous operation. We just want to get a store instance. We don't want to do the initialization of the database here. Instead, we want to do this when we initialize, right? And right now, initialize doesn't pass us anything. But as I mentioned, we need Dart to pass us the path of the directory where we can store our database. So we're going to add a string parameter to our message, and then we can take that here, and that's going to be we're going to call it the updir, and then we can go ahead and create the database. So first of all, we want to make sure that we only do this once. So if someone sends this twice, we don't want to actually create the database twice. So we should have a DB now. So I'm wondering what's wrong here. Okay, did we? Oh, initial. Oh, I put it in the wrong spot. It needs to be here. Oops, let's go back here. And so now we want to make sure that we didn't initialize the database yet. So if you already have a database, right, then we don't have to do this again. Okay, so only if you don't have one yet, we'll do this step. So we're going to figure first out what the DB path is. And this is a really roundabout way of joining a path. So I'm just going to paste it in. And it's basically doing the same, and we import the DB name, and it's basically doing the same as just adding a / and basically doing something like DB name well, actually the updir and / the name. And I try to just find the most correct way to do this in Rust, and so this seems to be the more correct, but it's really, really verbose. But yeah, okay. So now we got basically the full path to the DB that we're going to create. And so then what we're going to do, we're going to call the new that we have before, and we want to pass the DB path in. And so this one can obviously have an error or be fine, right? So we're going to actually match on that. And so why is this still complaining? Yeah, okay, so we need to match arms. And so there are two outcomes, right? Either we have a DB that was created or we have an error. And in the case of an error, we couldn't create the database. That's really, really bad. So we actually will have to make that a severe error and tell the user about it for sure. So what we're doing here is saying that right, we're passing in the detail, the message that we should show the user, failed to open database at, and then we include the details to be logged to the console, so we as the programmer know what happened. And in the case that it went well, we'll assign this created DB to our store, right? And we also want to log. So let's wrap this into something. We want to also log that we created the DB. So we're going to use with log info, and again, this is kind of long to type, so I'm just going to paste it in. And basically, we're just saying we create a database at this path, and that's actually also really good for us to know where the database ended up as a programmer. And that is all we have to do, change here. And what we now need to do, obviously, is change it on the dot end. So let's just first run bindgen and compile our binary again. And now we're going to go ahead and install a tool that we need to figure out what that path where we store the database actually needs to be. So there is a Flutter package called Path Provider that provides different kind of paths that we might want to know for each device, and we're going to use that to figure that out for ourselves as well. So we're going to add that, and then we're going to use that to figure out the application support directory. Actually, so we're going to go to our main .dart, and before we initialize, we call initialize here, which now is actually different, right? So it's still analyzing. So it's easy. We get the information that we're missing an argument now, right? In order to figure out what that would be, we are going to use that module. So what we'll do is we're going to say the app dir is, and this is an asynchronous operation, get application support directory is what we want. And as you can see, that came from the path provider. And then we pass it here. That's pretty much all we have to do. But there's still, obviously it needs to be .path to get that string. But I actually ran into some issues that basically it couldn't make that call without failing if we didn't first do this. So we're making sure that Flutter bindings are initialized, and then we can use that module. And then we get the path and we pass it to the store. And that is all we have to do on the Dart side to initialize, or at least to get the path to initialize the database, right? And at this point, we should actually be ready to run our application. And all it's going to do now, if everything works out, is to create the database and create the tables and not much, not anything else, right? And it's also going to tell us, because we're logging, where it's creating that. So let's see and wait for it to start up. And we don't have to worry about all these error messages or warnings. They're just there to tell us that we're building against a different version of macOS, and I haven't found a way to fix it. Okay, so let's see. So we get, okay, we got here, initialize database at, right? So let me just, and so this is also really useful, right? As I said, to figure out where actually did our database end up. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at that. Okay, so we have to put in quotes. And we can see that, yes, there was a Reddit ticker Sqlite created. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually link that to, and we're going to call it data macOS, right? So that we don't have to, oh, we need to, well, that's, so we can just do this. No, sorry, data macOS. And we can then see our Sqlite database there. In order to quickly interface with our database, we are actually going to use a Vim database integration to quickly query our database. So, for that to work more efficient, we're going to create some queries to help us with that we can just use. And I'm going to add them in a new folder, SQL. And so one is going to be, we just want to see all the posts, and then the other one will be see all the scores. So let me just put that here. And then all we're going to say there is select star from the Reddit posts. And then we're going to have one more, and it's going to be all scores. Scores.sql, and it's going to be somewhat similar, except that it's going to be scores that we're going to get scores. Okay, so now we get the database ready, but in order to see that the table actually includes the correct columns, for instance, we can say, well, show me the schema of the Reddit posts table, and it shows us basically the query to create it. And we can also do the same thing for scores to make sure that that table got created correctly, and we can see that the index got applied and everything. So that's pretty cool. Obviously, we could use this is just using the Sqlite tool under the hood, right? So we could do the same thing. Just going to show that real quick. We could do the same thing. So if we open our data base here, right, and we say tables, it works the same way, except in this case, it's kind of nicer, for me at least, to use directly from Vim, because I like Vim. And then later on, you can see that if I, for instance, do this query, and then I just want to refresh it, I can just do that, and it refreshes it. So, we can see that our data is entered correctly. One thing I wanted to point out in the database is that we are saying here create table if not exists. So this actually will only happen the very first time. We can see that we do that for that table as well, and for the index as well. So once the database was created, the tables will never be overwritten. So in order to, if we wanted to add a column later, or like while we're developing, and we just want to refresh everything and recreate everything, we'd have to delete the database. But this way we make sure that once the user has data, that we don't, like on app restart, overwrite it. So let's close all this down, and let's jump over here, and we're going to open up our database file again, and we will now add functionality to insert posts and scores. So let's start with the post. We're going to put a header here, insert posts and scores, because this file will grow and grow, and we want to not lose, be able to navigate it quickly. So here we add a function insert post, and it will pass us the post reference, and it will return a result of, in this case, usize, because it will return how many rows were affected by the query. Like in this case, it will most likely be one post that we added, unless it was already added before, then it would be 0. So first of all, we need to get the timestamp, right? What we're going to do is we'll have the timestamp of the post is, so let me add that. And so the post has a system time. We cannot store it like this in the database. So what we'll have to do is we're going to have to change it to seconds. And we're going to implement that method in a second, no pun intended. And then we are going to execute this query on the database to insert the post. So it's going to be multi-line query. And again, we're going to map any error. So I'm just going to post that, and because that's not that new, different than what we did before. So here we got that. And it should actually be now, okay, so obviously, if you don't think about this one, oh, we need params, right? So, so this is a macro we're going to use in order to add params. And now it should actually be already happy. Okay, so let's fill in that query. It's actually pretty straightforward. So we're going to insert or ignore. That means if we already have that post, we won't insert it again into Reddit posts, which is the table. And we're going to add the post ID and the title of the post, the URL, and when it was added, which we're going to figure out with the timestamp in a second. And the values are going to be parameterized to, right, just do the right thing. We want to prevent SQL injection attacks, even though in our case it might not be even an issue, but still good practices are good. So that's the query, and now we just need to pass in the params. So we have the post ID, the post title, and the post URL, and then the added. Okay, so we got that query ready, and all that's needed now are the timestamp in seconds, which we'll add right now. And we'll just paste that in. I'll just walk through it. The main concern here, so we're basically getting a system time, right? And we're getting a Unix epoch, which is a constant. And we are unwrapping here because we're assuming that our system time that we got was correct. We're assuming that our computer works. So it's unsafe, but it's probably never going to have a problem. The other thing to consider was that seconds actually returns a U64. But we are the largest integer that we can store in Sqlite is U32, so we're actually converting that here. And in order to make sure that doesn't cause any problems, I looked at what's the largest U32 and what's the current Unix epoch sex. And we can see here that we still have like decades to go before this would actually cause a problem. Eventually it would, but we probably don't have to worry about this right now. Most likely fine. So let's save that, and yeah, we need to actually put that outside of our impl because that is not an impl method. So now we are good to go. Now we will use that method to store the post information whenever we add it. So where we do try start watching, right, in this method here, we'll add some more code here. So right before we return the post, right, we'll make sure to add it to the database. What we also will do, we saw that when we actually can't create the database, we don't exit the app. We actually just, you know, we have a severe message to the user, but we didn't exit. So we want to make sure that only if we have a database connection actually in the store. So we're going to store the read, and we're going to get the DB, right? And only if that is not none, right? Then we'll do this block of code. Otherwise, we can't store in the database because we couldn't initialize it. And then we'll look at well, let's start this way. So let's do insert, right? So this kind of comes clear piece by piece. So we want to insert the post, right? And this one returns a result, so it could be an error, right? And that's why I already want to do this, but let's go step by step. So if we have an error, right, then we want to log something. Otherwise, we are basically done, right? That's all we had to do. So what we want to do here is with error, and we're going to say failed to insert post, right? And that's what we will show to the user. And then also we want to log the actual error to the console. Okay, and that was all that's needed there. So we don't need to actually run bindgen. We can just compile our binary because we didn't change any of the API, right? At all in this step. So now we are able to run the application. And I will do that in a time compressed manner. So let's add a post. And so we added a post, right? So that means at this point, we should actually have something in our database. So if we do this now, we should have, okay, there you go. So we have this post added. Let's add another one and do this again. So I'm going to copy a link from over here. All right. Set that in. Okay, cool. And now we should be able to just refresh that query. And we have the other post. Now, what we don't have yet, if I remove it, right, the post stays. So, right, it's still there. So if I actually now restart the app, and if we were to query the post, which we don't yet, then the post will still be there. And we will fix that later on. Let's close this down for now. And we'll go back to our DB. And inserting a score is actually very, very similar to inserting a post. So I'm just actually going to paste that code in and we'll walk through it. We are getting the post ID that this score belongs to, the current timestamp, and the score itself. We convert to seconds, right? And then we'll have a query here where very, very similar, as you can see, where we just add into a different table the Redis scores. We add the post ID, we add when it was added, and the score value. And again, if something goes wrong, we'll provide a really meaningful error and return. And that's all there is to do here. And then obviously we need to now call this function from somewhere. And we're polling posts here, right? So this is where we're polling posts. So every time we get a new score, instead of just adding that to the post in memory, we also need to store it. So what we'll do at the very bottom here, where we got the score, instead of just finishing, we'll actually add that to the database. So again, we're going to make sure that we only do this if we have as a ref, right? And here's a little different, like we already have a store reference, so or a store variable, right? So we're going to use that. And then we'll say that we'll just, it's really the same code almost, right? We're going to say we're going to have an error, right? We might have an error, so we're going to have if error. Then we want to log something, but we're going to insert the score, and again, it's the ID of the post that we just worked with, and then the timestamp that we have, and the score itself. So, and if you go to these values right here, this is the timestamp, and we have the score value is right here where we iterating through it, and so each score we store for this post, and that's pretty much it. And if you have an error, right, we want to failed to add score for post. But note, like it's the same as we did for the inserting a post. If you got an error there, it's not a severe error, so we just log it like this. And at this point now, we should be able to build and then run again. And now let's add a post. And we'll keep that over here. And we'll use our DB queries again. So we get all posts. Okay, fine, right? But now we actually want to go ahead and get all scores. And we start to get some scores, right? And as you see, I can refresh them and we get more and more scores every 5 seconds or so. So that works fine. However, we still have the issue that if I now close the app, right, and I restart it, we don't retrieve these scores and posts at startup, which is not desirable, which is kind of the point of storing them in the first place, right? So what we'll do is in the next part, we'll implement that. So yeah, no post here, right? Not what we want. So let's clean everything out and we are ready to get started on retrieving the posts and scores on startup of our app. Now what we want to do is retrieve the posts that we're watching, right, whenever the app starts new. So we want to basically load those from the database along with their scores. So we are here in the DB module, and this one's actually quite a bit of code. So I'm going to paste it in part by part, and we're going to walk through this. So what we're going to do is we try to get all the posts, right, which returns a result of vector of post, which is to be expected. It returns a result obviously because something could go wrong. So here we're missing an import, which we add, and we're going to implement that method right here in a second. So what we're going to do is just going to basically apply that query, and whatever we are getting out, right, we're pulling out all the posts, right, and for each post we map over it. And first of all, we're making sure that we were able to extract it correctly. Otherwise, we have an error. So if we couldn't extract a post, that's pretty bad, right? So we make that an error, but we still don't, we still keep going. We just return none for that post, and in the end, it will just not be part of those posts. And at the same time, the user will see an error message. And then what we'll do is we'll go through those posts one by one, and we get the scores of that post. We're going to implement that also in a second. And then we'll assign those scores to the post, right? And basically, we could probably also do this with a table join, right? In one statement, just pull all the posts with the scores. But this is just one way that works, and it's probably a little easier to understand at this point. But improvements are possible. So now here we have the method to get the scores, right, that we call for each post. So we pass in the posts that we got, and then we do something similar we did for the post. We basically now got we map over all the scores, right, and we try to extract that from the resulting row, right, and then if something goes wrong, we print, in this case, a warning, because if we don't get all the scores, it's probably not so bad, right? So we at least print a warning and we exclude it from the result. Otherwise, we return the score. And that's pretty much all there is to that. And then the part that's still missing is these helpers. And we're going to also just copy and paste those, and I'll walk through those that make it a little easier to do what we need to do. So here we go, adding these helpers. We need to import a row. Okay. And there's still some errors. Okay, sex to timestamp. We still need that as well. So we're going to get that as well. So let me make sure I can find that. Because obviously I already implemented this to be a little faster here, to not have to code this one line by line. So sex to timestamp. So we already had timestamp to sex right here, and we're missing the contrary, where we basically convert the seconds that we have to a proper timestamp. So it's basically doing the exact reverse of this one. Okay, now let's go through those methods here. So let's start with the post actually. So try to extract post. So we have a row, and we'll assume that we have it's basically like a row you can think of as an array, and we try to get the first column, the second column, and so on, and we hope that everything is where it's supposed to be. And then the added field here is a system time, so that's why we convert this field with that method down there with the sex2 timestamp. And then the scores for now we return as empty, right? So that's basically what we use here. So here on the post, right? So we first of all we have the empty, and then as we said, we go through each score or each post and get the scores for that post. So that's implemented here. Very similar, we try to get the sex, which we assume is in the first field, because right, obviously this maps to the added, right? This maps to our query. And then we'll pull the timestamp out of that. And then here's one interesting thing that, so the timestamps in the database, we store them also kind of, not depending on the post at all. It's basically all the scores are based on the same Unix epoch seconds. However, when we actually show them, we show the scores, basically how long after this post was added was the score basically queried. And so that's why we need to add, kind of convert this here. We need to say duration since the post was added, right? Which will make it kind of conform to what we just said. And so then we get the actual score itself and return it in result, right? So we got all that. And then obviously we have to still use those methods somewhere, right? So we got that ready though. And the next thing we'll do is jump over to the to our initialization method and actually use those methods here to get the posts that were in the database. So let's jump over to our lib file, which is the main entry point. So, lib. Okay, and what we're going to do is here we have the initialize method, right? Basically, that runs whenever we send the initialize message from the from Flutter, right? And so as we can see here, we just initialized the database, right? If it hasn't been initialized yet. And so what we'll do in the next line, if we got a database, right, only if that actually worked, will we execute this code. So, right, we got this, and now what we'll do is we're going to try to get all posts, so db.get all posts, right? And obviously that can go wrong. So we're going to match on that. And the result of that will be the posts, self.posts equals, right? So we assign to the store here, right? The initial posts. Okay, so then it's basically going to tell us that we need to fill the match arms. Okay, cool. So we got that. So first of all, let's handle the error. So something went wrong retrieving the posts. And as we could see, we don't really return an error in some cases that are not that critical, where we basically can just alert the user that, okay, we couldn't get a post or we couldn't get a score. But in this case, if we get an error here, that means we couldn't get the posts at all. And that's pretty bad. So it's going to be a read error. But also we don't want to like, yeah, it's not like the end of the world either. So we can still keep the app running, right? So retrieve existing posts. And we're going to pass the error. So that error will then be printed as the details. And in this case, what we're going to have to do is return a hash map new, which basically says, okay, we couldn't find any posts, but we need to assign some posts, right? We need to start with something. And so we return that. We set these posts to empty in case we couldn't get anything from the database. And so maybe we restart, and hopefully next time we restart the app, then everything will work. And so if we did get the post error, right, that's obviously the better outcome. So what we do then is we need to basically pull them. So here they are in a vec, right? So what we need to do, we need to convert them into a hash map. So there are multiple ways to do this. There's probably a way more functional way to do this, but sometimes actually doing it in a somewhat iterative style is not that bad. So we're going to have a new hash map, of this type, and then we go through all the posts, right? And then we just insert the key will be the post ID, and we have to clone that because we're also going to pass in the clone to, sorry, the post itself. We're going to basically hand ownership to the map itself, right? And then it's still complaining because we're not returning the map yet. All right. So that is the way we do this here. And as you can see, we are never cloning the entire post. You're just basically transferring ownership to the hash map, but we do have to clone the ID because it will be used as a key as well as a field on the post itself. And at this point, we should be able to run the app again. And when we start up, we should actually see the posts that we have from before. So now let's add 2 posts here, and let's show that when we restart the app, it will still, both of those posts will still be there, right? So we got 2 posts, and let's have them collect a little bit of scores, just at least 2 or 3, so we can show that not only the post reloads correctly, but also the scores of the posts are included. Okay, so this is good enough. Now we're going to close the app, and we're going to restart it. And if everything went correct, then we will see the same posts we just looked at and their scores. And yes, so we have the same posts here and the scores we basically collected up till now. Now, obviously, to be honest here, this is not how it was when I did this the first time, right? I had to work this out a little bit. Maybe the query didn't just work right away, or whichever. I just want to point out that if you're doing this yourself, I highly advise to not have to restart the Flutter app all the time, but do it in a similar way that we did earlier, where you're using some sort of Dart file, where here you write some code that just initializes a store and makes sure that there are some posts there, right? And obviously also you can use the, just look at the database itself and make sure that everything gets added correctly like we did earlier, but to correctly retrieve from the database and show it, and I actually used a file like this to quickly iterate and find out my mistakes. And the final thing now that's missing is that we need to remove a post from there. So if I remove this post here, right, and now I even just do a hot restart, the post comes back. And why? Well, because it's still in the database. So what happened is we ran the initialize message again and reloaded that same the posts that were in the database. And since the remove method at this point doesn't also clean out the post from the database, it just reappears. So that's what we're going to fix next. And we're going to proceed the way that we did before for the database part. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste in the code to remove the posts and scores. And then we'll go through this, and then we'll hook it up to the rest of the app. So what we'll do here is we execute a query that tells the database to delete all the posts with that matching that post ID, which obviously will be that one post we want to delete, which we'll pass in, right? And then again, we handle errors the same way. We try to provide the most info and context. And then what we're going to do also is remove the scores that are associated with that post, right? So basically, we want to remove all the rows in the Reddit scores table that has the same post ID. And that should clean out all the scores. And then what we'll actually do, we return, just to be 100% correct here, we return how many rows were affected, which means the number of rows, in this case, mostly 1, for the post that got removed, and then for each score, 1 row that got removed. And so that's the only thing we have to do here. And now we're going to go and hook this up. So let's open the lib file. And basically, wherever we stop watching a post, right, that's where we need, oh, I just saw it actually, stop watching, right? In here, we need to do something extra. So right now, we just basically remove the post from the hash map, right? And here also, we need to clean it out from the database. So first of all, again, we do the same thing, right? Only if we have a database connected, then we do this part. So basically, our app should still function even if the database wasn't connected, because every time we do some database operations, we check first that it's that we have it, right? And so now what we do is really similar to what we did before. So we try to delete the post, right? And the ID will be basically the ID, right? The post ID, and so then obviously something could go wrong there, right? And so we fill out the match arms and handle the errors, and then the number of rows, right, we'll pull out from here, right? So the rows that were affected by this operation, we get here. And actually, we could do it with, actually, we're not assigning this anywhere. The rows are actually inside the OK response, right? And then here we have an error. So again, first handle the error. And nothing new here. We're just going to say that we really had some problem. We couldn't delete that post, which is probably something we should alert the user about. It's not like severe, but we know now that the post will most likely reappear again after restart, right? All right, and then here, if we find the rows, then we basically don't have to do anything. But if we know how many rows were affected, so we could even at least tell us as developers how many scores were actually deleted. We know that the post was most likely deleted, so we're going to say removed post, and then here we put the number of scores that we removed from the database. And it's obviously going to be rows -1, right? Because the post gets 1 row that it affects by removing that post, and the rest remaining rows are the scores that were removed. Now what we can do is basically just take our app here, right? And we obviously have to rebuild and restart. So let's just do that first. And then we can look at how to check that this actually works correctly. So let's Flutter run. And now I'm going to, first of all, we need to basically make sure that we actually remove the scores correctly. So here we have all the scores, which, let's just say how many rows there are. So we got 138 minus whatever 2 lines of scores, right? So, and then let's see the scores actually, right? Let's see the posts, and we got 2 posts in the database, right? So now we can go ahead and remove this post here. And now if everything went correctly, we should actually see that one is gone. Okay, cool. Now did the scores also get removed? Let's check that. So we had 138, we got 76 now. So we just confirmed that yes, this works. The scores are actually correctly cleaned out, and you can see that the only post ID left is for this one post that we still have. And then obviously we can also just hot restart the app and see that the post didn't come back this time like it did before. And we can also see that the log message that we get is very useful. So we can see that we removed the post and 70 scores, well, mistyped here. So we're going to fix that from the database. Right? So let's fix the typo here, and then we are done with this one. And at this point, the app is actually fully functioning. And now it's time to look at some best practices, especially regarding performance, which we have to watch out for since we are sending data back and forth from Rust and Dart, right? So let's clean out our database on the bottom, and let's jump to the post qubit, which I'm going to show something that we don't do yet, very ideal performance. wise. So let's look at the place where we are refreshing the post state, right? So basically right here. As you can see, what we're doing is we are accessing the store.posts and then pull out the posts that we actually want. And we do that for each post. So right, every time we get a new score for any of those posts, right, we do that operation. We're doing this every 5 seconds at this point, so it's probably not that bad. But if we increased the resolution, we would do that a lot more often. Now, if you look at what that does, it will actually go and get all the posts from the store, right? So it gets all the stores, all the posts, right? And then it basically converts them to a hash map in Dart, right? So this is what that does. And if you look at that closer, it actually iterates now through basically through that hash map that's on the Rust side. So when we get this back, right, and this may be some details, but it's important if you're interested in achieving really good performance with RID. So here, what we're actually getting back is a pointer to the posts, right? So that's still cheap. But once we go and iterate through them in order to convert them to a Dart hash map, we are getting each post, right? But we already know here in our Cubit, we already know what post we want. So why would we get all the posts, right? So what we can do instead is, and that's using the more like under the hood API and a little more advanced, but this is what we'll have to do in some cases to get the performance we want. So the first rule is if we use that API, we have to make sure while we are accessing the store, we have to lock the store. So the run locked function is available on the store, on the raw store, right? So here we have the raw store. So the store itself provides us the high-level API, and then the raw store provides us the lower-level API. Okay, so now run locked, what it does actually, it gives us the raw store. I call it raw just to be really obvious. And all we have to do here is actually not that hard. So we go here and we say get the post, and now that's a pointer, but it has a method on it, get. And we can just then say postActive.postID. Pretty much similar to what we're doing below, but much better performant. Let me just see if that, okay. And now if we just go to that get method, all it basically does is you give it the ID of the post you want, and it uses still the pointer, right? So we are still dealing, as you can see here, we're still dealing with the pointer. We never actually got the entire hash map across to Dart. We actually only got the pointer to the hash map, and now we can pull out the post that we want, and then you can see here that it converts it to Dart, and now we got a post again. So once we have that post, we don't have to lock the store any longer, right? Because now it's converted to a Dart object. And I know this is a little bit more complex, and we don't have to worry about it initially. You can see we built this entire app without worrying about it. But once you see maybe a performance improvement that you want to make, you can basically use that lower level so-called raw API to basically to improve the performance, right? And so that is all I wanted to show. Let's just restart, let's just save all of this, and let's just hot restart the app and make sure this still works. And so let me open the app here. And let's just for fun add another post. Just to make sure that nothing broke. Obviously, we could have also restarted the app from scratch, but hot restart actually should be fine because that change in the post qubit is now actually active. So we can see everything still works as expected. The app is running great. Let's actually launch the app again just to show that what we did works, even though hot restart will show that as well if it didn't. But also I wanted to show something that I leave to the exercise as an exercise to whoever was watching this screencast up to here. Originally, the app that I built had a way to click on here and then launch the URL in the browser, right? And that would work on the macOS desktop or Linux or on all devices. In order to keep the screencast somewhat short and make it not too long, I left that part out. And that's an exercise that you can do if you're interested. You will use the URL launcher package that's on pubdev, and you'll have to look a little bit through what you have to add here. You know, if you want to launch HTTPS or HTTP, you have to basically define that. It's somewhat tricky, but it's very well explained here. So I'll leave that to you. And then finally, if you like the screencast and you want to kind of build an app with RID, this is the website. I'm going to include that obviously with the notes below this video. And if you want to support me in developing RID further and making more tutorials like this, be sure to hit the sponsor button and help me out with a monthly donation. And thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, there was one more thing. I just created a pull request for everyone to use who wants to review the code that we used in this tutorial. So here we have commit for commit, the changes that we made in order to develop the app piece by piece, right? So you can go top to bottom until the very here where we just optimized the way we got a post, and you can review that. You can just click on each of those commits and then look at what we changed and so on. This just in case it was difficult to follow in the video itself. So again, I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to come back for more tutorials and subscribe to my YouTube channel to know when those new tutorials come out. And I hope you give it a try.